Welcome to the Fail Forward podcast. The purpose of this podcast is change the negative stigma around failure into a positive. Failure is only a negative if we do not learn from it and we give up. Welcome back to the Fail Forward podcast. Today, I've got James Seelow with us. James is an entrepreneur and a personal trainer. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Thanks, Henry. Great to be here.
So tell me, James, take me back as far as you need to go to tell me really, how did you get into personal training and entrepreneurship, and where did it all start for you?
Okay, so I guess I came into PT quite late. So I was in my 30s. So prior to that, I've had a huge amount of different kind of jobs. So I started off working in Next, doing a sort of like a Christmas job.
Yeah, my sister used to work in Next, so
Did she?
And at Christmas it was a nightmare with the January sales and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So and that Christmas playlist on loop, driving home for Christmas. Every time I hear, I get quite nostalgic about it. Actually, I must admit, but the memories kind of come flooding back. I worked in TGI Fridays as a bartender, doing sort of like flair and making cocktails and all that sort of thing, which was great. That's how I met my wife, actually. So that was a great experience. And then sort of things got a little bit serious, had kids and needed to kind of settle down a bit.
Yeah.
So I worked in freight forwarding and did that for 10 years.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I was thinking, I've got to do something different.
Yeah.
I'm kind of dying a little bit inside every day. I was seeing guys coming in their sort of 50s, 60s, and all they were talking about was what they'd seen on the TV the night before. And I'm thinking, I've got to get out. I really do have to get out. So I took all of my annual leave in one go.
Yeah.
And went and did a course, did 4 weeks down in Bournemouth, got qualified as a PT. And on the last day that I was there on that course, there was a letter that came through from a GP referral scheme in Eastleigh. And they were looking for people to come on, and I applied for the job, got it. So I did a kind of a part-time doing that whilst I was still working in freight forwarding, but then transitioned out as soon as I started to get my own clients. But it was an amazing experience dealing with people with high blood pressure, strokes, injuries, all those sort of things, health issues, mental issues as well, mental health issues. So that was a great grounding.
So when you were working and you were thinking, you're seeing these guys and you're like, okay, these guys, they're just talking about the TV they've been watching, that you could see the future, you could see your future self potentially. And you're thinking, what was the driver then? Because I know you mentioned kids and family and stuff. So what was the driver to go, do you know what? I want something different.
I hesitate to say the word depressed, but I was really flat. I mean, going in day to day, I could hardly speak to anybody because I was that dissatisfied with my life at that point. You know, just felt like going through the motions and there's got to be something better than this.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd had sort of mental health issues previously, background. I was sexually abused as a child. So growing up was really, really difficult and tough. I only recognized that sort of fairly later on in life when I went through a series of sessions with a hypnotherapist. So it's one of these things that if you've had that level of abuse in your childhood, I suppose there is a degree that you kind of know that something happened, but you're not quite sure what happened.
Yeah.
And it was then going through that process that came out.
Yeah.
So I always felt kind of off in some way. I didn't quite know why. There was always that thing that in the back of your mind, I don't fit in, there's something not quite right. Relationships and the way that I was with other people, I was quite sort of defensive, a little bit aggressive in social situations, felt sort of threatened, but I didn't know why.
Yeah.
So you go through that kind of loop. But anyway, I went through hypnotherapy, had a lot of kind of personal work in that journey, and then sort of thought, well, I've got to do something different. So
where did fitness was fitness in your world at this point?
Yeah, it was always been there. So like, you know, at school, playing rugby, going to the gym and all that sort of things, it was always there as a kind of a stable for me.
Yeah.
And again, I think as a young man sort of building up, you know, getting bigger muscles and having that defense mechanism was very much that kind of part of, you know, don't fuck with me because I'm, you know,
and do you think
I'm
that
big.
was driven from that past
Yeah,
experience
definitely.
of
I
wanting
didn't
to...
know then, but I certainly
Yeah.
know that now. And I think as I've sort of aged, that, you know, your priorities change.
Mm-hmm.
And that now, because I've kind of processed that, what's happened, and I can talk about it much more openly now. I was never able to sort of verbalize it or put it into words.
Sure.
So now that I can kind of talk about it quite openly and be okay with it, that's then impacted on how I feel about myself generally, and certainly sort of the age that I am now, it's much more important to be kind of fit, healthy, thinking about longevity, health span, all that sort of thing,
Yeah.
and where I'm going to be in the next sort of 50 years. Fingers crossed that I can, you know, even 70 years with the way that things are going.
Yeah. Yeah.
But fitness, in answer to your questions, has always kind of been there.
Yes, you always had this love for or desire to be fit, to be strong.
Absolutely.
So you've left the freight forward,
Yep.
and you're now working at a GP practice.
So working at it was Fleming Park back then. It's now Places for People in Eastleigh.
Yep. Yep.
So that was a great grounding. So the type of people that I was working with really gave me a great foundation. I then went over to West End and worked at what is now, I think it's David Lloyd or Virgin Active, I think.
Yeah, it was Virgin, and I think then David Lloyd bought it out, didn't it?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
so it was a Sporter when I went there. So the Hampshire Tennis Club. So worked there for a few years, created a business from there, and then took on a partner. There was a girl that was working there with me. We sort of partnered up, and then took a studio at the Aegeus Bowl, or the Rose Bowl, as it was then. And we had a little personal training studio in there. So in terms of my business partnerships, that was the first one that didn't work out.
Okay. So what went wrong with that?
Well, it was one of those kind of situations that great at the beginning because, you know, we were sort of colleagues together. And then it sort of came down to the finances. We were running boot camps and all that sort of thing. We had a little studio doing PT kind of one-to-ones in there. And I don't know, there was something that just kind of happened that we started to kind of have quite different views on things and perspectives around the business and how we would train people and all that sort of thing. And I think it's just one of those things you kind of grow apart. You know, it's one thing to know each other in a different scenario situation, but when it comes down to running a business together, the intensity gets such that cracks start to appear.
Yeah.
And
it's almost like a marriage, isn't it? Like it's kind of
like
is. It's like got to think, can I be with this person potentially for the rest of my life?
Yeah.
And are we the right values fit? Do we get on?
Yeah.
And you say cracks start to appear if that's not quite right. I think people do get into partnerships quite quickly, don't they?
Absolutely. And in all of these sort of situations, I take responsibility for the way that things work out. You know, it's never anybody else's fault. It's just, you know, at the time, you know, where I was at wasn't, you know, particularly in a good place, and things just weren't, you know, kind of working the way that I wanted them to. But all of these sort of things, you can kind of look at it and regret, and you think it's the worst thing at the time. So there was a lot of equipment that we had. You know, I'd taken money from my father-in-law as investment to buy the equipment. So there was that sort of element there of not letting him down, not letting the family down, all these different sort of things. And then when it came to it, you know, we'd sort of had a written agreement of who would take certain bits of kit and all that sort of thing. And I'm not proud of my, you know, behavior at the time because, you know, when you're in these heightened levels of emotion, you know, you do things that, you know, aren't great. So, you know, I completely put my hand up to that and say, you know, that was...
But you've got some good self-awareness there because you've said, I take responsibility. And a lot of people don't in those situations. It's very easy. And I've talked about it to the audience on this podcast a lot about taking accountability and responsibility. Because if you don't, you just blame everyone else. And then suddenly, you know, you're back to square one 100%. Again. So, you know...
You've got nowhere to go with that. You know, fundamentally, if you're living your life in that mindset, if it's everybody else's fault, you're never going to grow.
Yeah.
You're never going anywhere.
Yeah.
Because you're always... confined by, you know, other people's influences. And that's always going to be there. That's never going away. So all I can control is what I'm doing. You know, I can't control what other people are doing. So, and that was, it's all part of the learning. This is not something that you're kind of born with.
Yeah.
Or it's just a kind of a natural, it's a progression in terms of your growth, your journey through life generally.
It's the fail forward.
It's exactly that.
It's the fail forward
thing,
is, and it's part of the experience. Is that you're you're failing forward. It's people don't just become successful overnight. This whole overnight thing we were talking about it earlier on about the sort of TikTok world and everyone seeing these influencers. That it takes a long time. Everybody that's successful, they don't see what's behind that. So
they get a snapshot.
They get a snapshot.
They get a curated snapshot of whatever they want to show. But even sort of unpacking that, you think, well, a lot of thought goes into those kind of processes of what these people are putting out. Thousands of photographs taken to sort of get one or two that actually you see. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that people don't see. And it's until you scratch underneath the surface that you really start to kind of see what you have to go through on a daily basis. But I mean, I was going to say, I've got sort of young kids, and, my lived experience is not their lived experience. So when you're then trying to kind of impart your experience onto them, it's not entirely relevant, because they're like, well, Dad, we didn't have your upbringing. We didn't, have your schooling. I mean, I went to private school and boarded. I was at boarding school since about the age of 6 up until 11. Then I was a day boy, and then, it kind of went on to boarding again. So all of those kind of experience that I've had, they've not had. They've had a very secure upbringing of living at home and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's one of these kind of layers of experience that I wouldn't have had your life, you haven't had my life, but there's a level of commonality around business that you kind of get to see what it is to create something, what it is to fail, and the learnings that you get, and the cliche around that. Everybody says, oh, you learn from failure, you don't learn from success.
Yeah.
You hear that time and time again, but it is true.
It is true.
It is true.
Yeah, it is true. Recently, someone said to me, one of the worst things you can do if you go to the horse races is win.
Yeah.
Because then you think, I'm really good at this, and you do it again.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what I did in business at the beginning, is I did well, and then you go, oh, I'm good at this. And I think that's what sort of comes. It's when the times are tough, that's when you really, really learn.
Yeah, and that's the self-awareness piece as well, is that knowing that the good times are there, but there's also going to be times when it isn't so good, and making provision for that.
Yeah.
And I think you can kind of speak to that with your own experience in terms of, but it's human nature, isn't it? When things are going well, you just want more of it.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking, because you haven't had that pain of knowing what it is to lose everything.
Yeah.
So it's entirely understandable. So again, when you say to somebody, when you're advising somebody, don't get too carried away with the success, because, failure's just around the corner, and they go, fuck, no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because they haven't experienced it.
Yeah.
So, you have to bear that in mind, in respect of that people just are living their own moment-to-moment experience. And they'll hear it maybe, but whether they'll take it on board is another matter.
Well, they've got to learn it themselves a lot of the time, and that experience, and it just reminds me of something. We were on the school run this morning, and my boy is riding his bike. He's 4 years old, and he had a car in his hand, and my wife was trying to get the car out of his hand, and he was adamant that he wanted it. And I just said, Sarah, if he's got to learn himself. And she went, yeah, but I don't want to fall off the bike. And I was like, no, if he does, it sounds harsh.
Totally.
He'll learn himself, because he's not listening.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the same as adults. We don't always listen to what other people are saying, and we've got to work it out for ourselves.
And it's the hardest thing, I think, as a parent, is to allow them to fail.
Yeah.
It's that kind of level of failure. It's like, well, if they're getting close to the edge of the cliff, you probably want to stop them.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, let's kind of manage that actually they can fall.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And then learn, and then sort of the next bit, and then, they won't do it again.
Yeah, definitely.
But, we just want to, and I think sort of generationally, we're becoming more and more kind of like controlling and fearful. And again, that comes back to that piece we were talking about earlier about the media and the fact that we've got 24/7 access to the news, and this heightened sense of anxiety around that we never had before.
Yeah.
You'd have to go out and buy a newspaper, or you'd switch the 9 o'clock news on or whatever, and the watershed now is gone. That's over at 9 o'clock. That doesn't exist anymore. So at any time of the day, you can be getting access to these world events on in a good way, And then on the other end of the extreme, not so good, because we're constantly thinking about what's going on in the world.
And the funniest thing is we're at the safest point. Yes, we've got a war going on and we've got wars going on, but there's been wars going on for decades and decades, and there's been issues with recessions and economy and different things for decades. But now actually it's the safest time to be alive. The people are living longer, etc., etc. But people are more anxious about their futures than they ever have been, and that you're exactly right. It's because everyone's tapped in.
Totally.
And I'm sure we're going to get onto COVID and how that affected your PT business later. But just a prime example is I used to go and see my mum during COVID, and as we were coming out of it, and 24/7 she'd have BBC News on. And she was anxious, and I'm just like, Mum, just turn that off, because there's always breaking bad news.
Absolutely,
like, there's never breaking good news. Is there?
I mean, you can get in kind of conspiracy theories and all that sort of thing, but it just is really apparent that we're being kept in this sort of state of anxiety, fear. And what do we do when we're feeling anxious or fearful? Is we go and buy shit.
Yeah, and we make bad decisions.
We make bad decisions. But we're going to go, I want to make myself feel better, so I'm going to go and do some online shopping.
Yeah.
So depending on your perspective, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's like, it makes sense.
Yeah.
That, and at the end of the kind of newscast, you might get a good news sort of story, just think, oh, okay, the world's not coming to an end.
Yeah.
But I mean, I subscribe to, I actually put it out on LinkedIn just recently, but, you can actually subscribe to a platform that only gives you good news.
Cool. Love that.
And it's like, why would you not want that in your inbox?
Yeah.
On a weekly basis, just to see actually, carbon capture, for example, there are things that are now coming into place that we're taking carbon out of the air and reprocessing it and creating fuels and all that sort of thing. That having that abundance mindset is far better than just being in constant fear.
Yeah.
Because we're paralyzed.
Yeah.
So you cannot then go and see the bigger picture of what the opportunities are if you're just constantly being paralyzed by fear.
100%, and you're right. I hear a lot of conspiracy theories and stuff, and I'm like you, I don't buy into it all, but I do buy into the fact that we are in a consumer world, and there are very intelligent marketing people and people that understand how to get people to buy more. Like you go into Tesco's, for example, and the reason why the lighting is so bright is because it gets us into that state of buying state, and it gets us into that flight or fight. There's reason why everything's stacked in certain ways and different eye levels and all this kind of stuff.
Got cameras that'll track you and your, the way people move around the store and how that's all placed, that they know that if you go to that area there, you're going to buy this, Yeah,
it's really intelligent, and that's, I think, what it is. And I've talked about it. We talk about numbers a lot in this podcast, and when you're in a good place of knowing your numbers and you're advising your emotional part of your brain, because you've got your thinking emotional part of your brain, your emotional part will always win. But if you're in a state of anxiety, stress, whatever, your emotional part is going to make you make bad business decisions potentially, and buy something that you can't afford, or
totally.
do
and that then keeps you in that loop.
It does.
That behavior loop is like, oh fuck, I've done it again. Oh shit, here we go. We go round, and that's and I've, until really quite recently, fallen foul of not knowing my numbers. Having that sort of issue around, never good at maths at school and all that kind of stuff, and that sort of thing that you convince yourself. But it's the sort of, the mental arithmetic side of things, and it's that not wanting to address it because you feel stupid around it. And I've just actually recently taken on a money coach to really start to drill into that and say, well, okay, where does that come from? So I can then start to go back to everything that happened in childhood and say, oh, it was all about that, blah, 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 blah. But it's, again, taking responsibility for where you are now and saying, well, look, actually, this has now got to stop. That I need to know what's going on, that I can't just bury my head in the sand. And it's a respect thing, and it's a self-worth thing. That, you are actually asking for what you're worth, rather than just taking what you're given. And having those kind of boundaries around what you will do and what you won't do. And that's always been an issue for me. This whole kind of element of doing the personal training, being of service to others, being this kind of vocational thing of actually going, well, no, this is me. This is 20 years now of being doing this, all of the knowledge, all of the learnings, all of the experience is now worth something.
Yeah. But do you think that's come from the coaching that you now know that? Because actually probably 2 years in you would have been that good, or even a year in you'd have been that good. It's taken you 20 years to go, right, I'm now worth that. So
yeah, I mean, it's been a process, so it's not, again, that sort of that stop or the start and then sort of immediately kind of where you are now. It's a process. So again, it's that kind of, the seed that gets sown, the thinking about it, the then doing something about it. But I think this is kind of now moving it to another level, that you kind of go through these kind of steps that will get you to where you need to be. But I think it's feeling the pain sufficiently that you want to make that change. Yeah. And that's the same in fitness and, lifestyle in life generally, is until you feel the pain to a sufficient level that change then follows.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, when I lost everything, it took that to change my desire to want to learn, do self-development, get coaches, quit alcohol, all those kind of things. And it wasn't until that pain point, and actually I always talk about it being the best, worst year of my life, because maybe if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have had so many epiphanies and learnings from it. So yeah, it's those, it's very cliche saying, but diamonds are formed under pressure. And I think that's what happens when we get that pressure, and then and things, cracks happen, and we restart, and then we go again. It's when those diamonds are formed. So we've gone really sideways there, which I loved. That was a great conversation, and thank you as well for really sharing your vulnerability through this podcast episode already. It's really valuable for our audience. So we've got this, going back to where we were, you've got this partnership with this lady. It's breaking up, you're having to sell the kit, and now what's next after this? What kind of, how did you get out through that, and what was the next steps for you?
Yeah, so sort of broke away from that and was just doing kind of mobile PT one-to-ones. I was doing outside boot camps, so I just take some sort of rec ground and go out and do sort of boot camps there. I also took over a space inside, and I think really right from the beginning of my PT career, I wanted to be different. I think there's a slight kind of belligerence in me that I'm very much kind of anti-establishment. I don't like to kind of follow the crowd, and I like to do things a little bit differently. So when I sort of hear the word entrepreneur, I don't know that I don't describe myself as an entrepreneur. I think that sort of term is a little bit kind of weighted weirdly, that I don't see that it applies to me. My brain is always on the go.
Yeah.
It's never not thinking about stuff.
Yeah.
And my biggest issue is remaining focused on one thing. I'm like I kind of liken it to, I walk down the beach and I see a nice shiny pebble and I pick it up.
The magpie effect.
Yeah. And I put it in my pocket, and I end up getting to the end of the beach and I've got some seriously heavy pockets. Because there's so much, but it is like a magpie. So it's getting to the point where I want to do things differently. So I've got boot camps that I'm running with space hoppers. So people, adults, bouncing around on orange space hoppers.
Yeah.
Because it's fun.
Yeah.
Basically. Swing ball. I've got a swing ball in there. So it's one of the stations that people are just playing swing ball in pairs. So it's like you're just playing with people's psychology.
Yeah.
So they're bouncing around like loons on space hoppers, playing swing ball, but actually then they're doing some sort of, burpees and push-ups and some other kind of functional bits and pieces. But it's all about having fun.
Yeah, I love that, because I like a lot of the boot camps and the HIIT sessions I've been to, it's just like bear crawls, burpees, like it's just pure pain for like an hour, and then you do it for like 3 months, and then I'm like, you just wake up one day and something happens, you go on holiday and you never go back, because it's like it makes you feel good afterwards, but it's that ruthless that you go, I don't want to do this anymore. You do, like, I think the most I've done is 3 or 4 months of those kind of things. So actually I've not, like, it's very disruptive doing it that way, which I love. I love that disruptive mindset. And putting a bit of fun into it. So love that.
Yeah. So, and it's kind of, if it looks a little bit like play, you're not thinking about the pain of it.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about the activity. You're just focusing on having a bit of fun.
Yeah.
And it was all, kind of tongue in cheek. And I try not to take myself too seriously.
Yeah.
So
Love
so that was that. Also, when I was at Fleming Park, I did like deep water aquatherapy. So I'd be there with like 20 or 30 women of a certain age that were swinging around, bobbing around with kind of flotation devices on them. And we just have a laugh.
Yeah.
We just have some fun. And it was like, it was just different to that kind of expectation of somebody like me looking a bit like I do, doing something like that.
Yeah.
And that's, again, that kind of, just doing things out of the norm, the ordinary. So, and I kind of love that whole aspect of people looking at me and thinking or making up an opinion. And actually, it's completely, converse in that respect.
Absolutely
So
love that.
I quite like that. It tickles me. So, where were we at? We're kind of pandemic. Should we go to pandemic?
Yeah, so you were just doing some boot camps and stuff, and is that when pandemic came and slapped us in the face?
Yeah, so actually, let's go back a bit. So a client of mine had a friend who'd told him about electrical muscle stimulation. So that's the kind of the next waypoint. So he asked me to look into it. So he was massively into his gadgets. He loves tech and all that sort of thing, latest camera and biggest TVs you can think of and all that sort of stuff. He's just talked to me the other day about a TV that's coming out that's about 300,000. I'm like, oh my God, wow. Really? I was like, yeah, I really want it. So anyway, so it was him that kind of introduced me. I went to this expo in London. So there's one of the biggest fitness expos in Europe called FIBO, and they were on tour. So they go to like Milan, London, Paris, all that sort of thing. So they're in London. So I go to London, and serendipitously, there was a guy there who works for the same company that does this EMS device. So he's there doing a presentation. So I meet him and meet the guy that's been brought over to do the UK market. So he's opening up the UK market. And anyway, long story short, my client buys a system and then I buy a system for my business as well. So it's a big old unit that you carry around. You've got a waistcoat that you put on with sort of straps that go around the arms and the legs and the backside, and you're then wired to this big unit that stimulates all your major muscle groups with an electrical impulse. So you're not having to lift weights.
Wow. So
people with lower back problems, knee injuries, any sort of disability that they can't train traditionally with weights, they can do EMS, electrical muscle stimulation.
So they don't have to do any weightlifting, any resistance training at all. They just put this suit on and it's good to go.
Yeah, so it will stimulate all the major muscles.
Yeah.
You have to contract the muscle. Yeah. So very similar to how the muscles are activated normally. So the brain will send an electrical impulse through the nerve endings to the muscle.
Yeah. And
the result is a contraction. So what EMS does, it goes direct to the muscle. You still have to contract the muscle, but you're now having it stimulated with an electric impulse that goes 85 times a second. So it's contracting and relaxing really rapidly. It's the breakdown of that muscle fiber that then rebuilds, that then recruits more muscle fiber, and you then build and tone muscle and burn a lot of calories as well.
Wow.
Because more muscle, more calorie, higher metabolism.
And would you still get the endorphin rush that you would if you were working out?
Yeah, even probably more so. So certainly for people that kind of don't like to work out in the gym, don't like to lift weights, are intimidated.
Yeah.
So you can go and do this now and you get a great workout in 20 minutes and the equivalent to about an hour and a half, let's say 2 hours working out in the gym ordinarily.
Wow.
So fantastic for people with, busy lifestyles and who are time poor.
Yeah.
So that I got into about 8 years ago. And then let's fast forward to pandemic, lockdown.
Yeah.
Everything stops and my business literally grinds to a halt.
So at that point, just so I get the context, you'd bought this system that people can wear,
Yep.
and that was your PT sessions with people. Yep. They would come and pay, and they'd sit there and they'd do the whole thing. Because I take it these pieces of kit are, just for context for audience, very expensive, because there's probably stuff that you could buy on the shopping channel, like me and we were talking about earlier, where you can buy the belt and stuff, and that's not probably going to cut it to something that's, that's the difference in level of quality. Right?
And you're working with a trainer and they're taking you through a full workout, so it's not a passive thing. It's an active thing. So you've got to do lunges, squats, and you can do push-ups, bicep curls, tricep extension, all that sort of thing. But literally just using your own body. And the power of the brain. Because you are thinking about the area that you're working. You're activating the muscle against that pulse.
I see.
So yes, I'm taking it around mobile. So I'm hocking this thing, and it goes in a big suitcase, and it's not light. So you've got all the jackets inside it, all the accessories that have got to go with it. And you're having to wet the suit up and then put it on people, but it's efficient. It's good.
So then pandemic comes. And
so pandemic comes and everything stops. So I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be interesting. So I obviously can't go out and see people one-to-one. So I then go online. I'm doing online boot camps now. So like on Facebook Lives.
What was the initial reaction as COVID happened? Because I know there was that time, wasn't there? There was about a week or two beforehand, and there was talks of the army waiting it to come and lock down the country and how it was all going to go down, and no one really knew. And then we had the Cheltenham races where thousands of people went there for one last blowout, and no one really knew. So how were you feeling at that point? Were you anxious, stressed? What was going on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that anybody thought it was going to go on for as long as it was. So I kind of thought it was going to be a little bit of a hiccup. It was going to be a slight glitch. It was a forced kind of pause, but within a couple of months, we'd be sort of back to normal. So similar to, bird flu. I mean, we had the foot and mouth, didn't we? Actually, that takes me back to, I think it was around about sort of 2001 that we had that kind of foot and mouth, and I was due to run the London Marathon. And there was a training run that we had that was like a 20-mile training run that was cancelled because of foot and mouth. So I kind of thought it was going to be a little bit like that. But it wasn't.
No.
So it was that initial kind of thinking, well, this is going to be okay. We'll get back to normal in a few months. And then, okay, this is lasting a little bit longer and maybe things aren't quite. And then it starts to come out that this is now not going to end anytime soon. And that's when it really started to sort of hit, okay, what do we do? So that was then taking it online. The majority of my customers were quite happy to, do an online sort of Zoom or, over FaceTime or whatever. And as I said, on Facebook Live and all that sort of thing. So that kind of worked out okay. I was also doing like a scheduled like mental health kind of chat on Facebook Live. So really kind of talking to people about things that they could do at home, either, a bit of foam rollering or, a bit of meditation and stuff like that. And that was more almost for my benefit than I'm just keeping going, doing something. And I didn't charge for it. I just put that out and just to keep going, doing something, to keep my own sanity. But I think, the pandemic represented something very different for different people. I mean, you can only imagine what it would have been like to have been a single parent in a one-bedroom flat with kids at home. With an abusive partner or something like that. So you think, in terms of perspective, and I think, it's a word in the English language that covers a lot of things, is perspective. That if you think about somebody in that situation, actually my situation being, we just recently moved house. We're out in the country on a quiet country lane. If there's anything, it was the birds that were so loud because there was there's no traffic noise. There's no aeroplanes in the sky or anything like that. The birds were deafening. But you just got to kind of sit with it and appreciate the fact that, you couldn't do anything else but just be present in the moment and appreciate. So
no, I think you're right with that, because I always say My dear Nan, bless her, she was part of growing up with World War in London, and she always used to say, we used to go for food, and she goes always say, "Oh, I had a good war," and we'd be like, "What do you mean you had a good war? Who had a good war?" And she did. She was off dancing in London, and that she didn't really get affected by it that much. And she met, as we were talking about earlier, my grandpa, who's Dutch. And now I think when me and my wife talk, like, I think the pandemic was kind of like our time era's sort of world war. It was the biggest disruption to life as we know it.
I agree.
And I think some people had a tragic time, and just like you would do in a world war, if you had to send sons off, you had to go off yourself. But also some people had an okay time, and I think there are people in the pandemic who really did have that kind of okay time and had a good pandemic, as you say. So it's
and it seems weird to sort of say that, because there's countless people that had absolute tragedy. And obviously people passing away from COVID, but for the families not being able to go and visit them, and with funerals and everything else. I mean, it must have been horrendous for some people.
Working in the NHS would have been,
well,
hideous,
my wife is a nurse.
Yeah.
So, I got to see firsthand what she was having to do, and full PPE. I mean, like the hood and the whole shebang. So
tough.
Huge respect.
100%. Yeah, agree.
For what they had to endure. Putting their lives, because there was such uncertainty. Nobody knew quite what the extent was going to be. So, yeah, absolutely. Hats off.
100%. Agree. So then you're at a point and you're doing these home videos and lives and things like that.
Yep.
So what was the next step for you to sort of deal and still to be able to produce income and things through the pandemic?
Yeah, so I got introduced to a guy by my accountant who was a bit of a technical wizard. So by this time, the suit, as I said, was really unwieldy. It was a pain in the ass to carry around. So I wanted something more portable. So I went to this guy to come up with a solution of how I could have a smaller kind of unit that would connect to the suit that I already had, but would be sort of Bluetooth and more portable. So he had a look at it, kind of looked at the wires and stuff like that, and said, "Look, we can come up with something better than this." So anyway, I then went out to China, as you do, to source an alternative. Found this company, started having a conversation with them. And they had a suit that was all in one, so very much like a kind of a shorty wetsuit. So it came down to just sort of, above the knee and above the elbow, and all of the electrodes were integrated into it. You had a tiny little power box that connected to it with an app. You could then work it from that. So it's like, perfect. This is great. So everybody could have their own suit. You put it on, wearing nothing on underneath, get it sweaty, and it activates. Just spot on. And you can go out running in it, walking in it, go on your bike, whatever you wanted to do some yoga, do some Pilates, take it into a gym, put normal clothing on over the top. Nobody be any the way wiser. So this was like a perfect solution. So we then start to kind of spitball ideas around it in terms of the online training. So very much mid-pandemic, we can't see anybody one-to-one, so can we train people with this remotely? So we then develop an app, we get an app developer to do it, pump money into it ourselves. There's like personal equity going in, sweat equity going in. So me from my personal training experience and EMS and all that sort of thing, my business partner with his technical know-how and wizardry. And then we create a platform that we can then host this thing where people can be in anywhere in the world. So we started off with our app developer in India with the suit on. I'm controlling his suit from my garden office in the UK, and I'm controlling the levels and intensity and frequency on his suit in India. And I'm going, this is just astonishing. Within milliseconds of me changing, he's experiencing that change where he is. And I'm pinching myself thinking, how is this even possible? I know we've done this, we've designed it, but it works, and how is this possible? So that then starts to develop. We then partner up with another guy as a friend of my business partner who he's known for many years, and he's kind of a bit of an introducer. So he introduces us to a guy who's an ex-pro golfer in the States, who then has a network of other golfers, and we then start to train pro golfers in the States. And then from those pro golfers, we then get introduced to another guy who works for a company that do like high-end luxury resorts that then have celebrities come and play golf. And he is the guy that goes and plays golf with them. So he's got a network of people that he can then introduce me to, and we then start getting the odd A-list celebrity. No names. So, and I'm training them from my back garden, and it's bizarre. I mean, it's just surreal. So this is kind of in development, and it's, you know, growing. We're selling suits into the States, so people are buying them, using it at home, and they're training, you know, with us. We take on another trainer, and she's training them as well online. So via the app, we have a kind of a portal. They can then make connection, and we can train them over Zoom or FaceTime. Perfect.
Amazing. So is this like a bit like the Peloton model? So they buy the suit and then they subscribe as well. So you've got a purchase up front, and then you've got subscription.
Yeah.
Wow, love it. Yeah.
So that was the idea. That was the business model.
Yeah.
So highly portable, so they can take it wherever they go. You know, and a lot of these golfers are traveling. You can imagine.
Yeah.
So they're out on tour. They're in hotel rooms. They don't really want to have to go down to the gym because they're going to get hassled, whatever. So they can do it from their hotel rooms, up on the screen, you know, with their iPad or phone or whatever. So it was perfect. So then cut to my kind of cycle of behavior that starts to go, there's something not quite right here. And cracks again are starting to appear between myself and my business partner, that we're on very different pages in terms of where the business is going. So I'm very much customer focused, their customer journey, how they're interacting with the device, from, you know, onboarding them at the beginning, you know, how they receive it, what it looks like, the unboxing, that whole process, getting them to these different sort of stages of where they need to be. And his was very much on the bottom line.
Yeah.
So very much on the numbers. So bearing in mind what I'd said about the numbers,
Yeah.
I'm all about the kind of the love and the holistic and the, want everybody to be happy and fluffy clouds and unicorns and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, bottom line, which is absolutely right.
Yeah.
But it then gets to that point where I'm bringing people into the business, building relationships and things like that. And it's just not gelling. They're sort of saying things to me like, you know, are you sure about this situation? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, okay, I think we are on two very different paths here. And we're having meetings weekly, and having meetings for the sake of meetings, and nothing's getting done. And I'm trying to sort of implement stuff, and it's getting sort of... So again, I'm taking responsibility that things that I'm not doing and should be getting done, but you know, it's just the impetus isn't there. I'm losing the love for it, and I need to be feeling the love to kind of go forward, the enthusiasm. So cut forward to November last year that I say, look, it's not working for me. This is over a period of, you know, several months that I'm feeling this way. And we're having conversations, and he's saying, look, you just need to man up, grow a pair, blah, 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 knuckle down, that whole kind of macho type sort of thing. And I'm thinking, okay. So anyway, I said, look, I'm done. This is really dragging me down. It was 24/7. You know what it's like running a business.
Yeah.
You are completely absorbed by this thing.
Yeah.
So from the time that I wake up in the morning to the time that I go to sleep, it's Hyperbody.
Yeah.
You know, this is the company. And I'm up until sort of like midnight because I'm dealing with queries from the States, and, you know, the suit's not working properly. We're starting to get issues, all that sort of thing. And just over time, there's that kind of wearing down, that attrition of going, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
You know, what's in it for me? So then, you know, that starts to break down. So November last year, I said, I'm done. And I leave the business.
Big decision.
Huge decision.
How did that feel?
At the time, again, like a failure. You know, it just feels like, here we go again. You know, it gets to a point where and it's that whole process of thinking, you know, am I giving in? Am I giving up? It's getting hard. Am I just, you know, am I not made of the stuff to actually, you know, do this? So So it felt like a complete failure on my part, but I just couldn't continue with the way it was. I mean, had I have had potentially somebody more supportive and, but again, it's that responsibility of saying, we talk about this right at the beginning. We decided what we were going to do as a collective. But I got borne along by the enthusiasm and how things were going. So, it felt pretty shit.
But what did you learn from it all? Like, what's your biggest learnings that came off the back of that?
So I'm now going into potentially another partnership with 2 other guys. This is very, very, very early stages. But it's now doing the kind of the due diligence on those people. Now, I don't want to be jaundiced by what's happened. I don't want to be affected that now I'm looking at people differently because of what's happened. I'm still me. I'm still, with that kind of open mindset, open heart, and open, viewpoint, but being a little bit more savvy. Not guarded. I don't ever want to be guarded, and I don't want to be influenced by what's happened before. But I'm just taking things a little bit slower.
Yeah.
Rather than being kind of bowled over by the enthusiasm, this kind of, puppy dog. Want to do it.
Yeah.
The excitement of it.
The magpie again. The magpie. Yeah.
Of just going, okay, James, just take a pause.
Yeah.
Just start to be more strategic around this.
Yeah.
And again, with the kind of the money coach of thinking, okay, planning ahead now. Where do I want to be?
Yeah.
And let's put some things in place to move you towards that goal, rather than going, I'm at point A here. Point B looks really exciting.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about the steps of point A1, point A2, 3, 4, whatever that looks like. Of ending up at B and getting excited by that, but not actually doing the work to get to point B, which I've done historically. So that's been one of the biggest learnings, I think, from me, is taking that, attitude towards these kind of situations, or the response of just going, I want it tomorrow. I want it tomorrow. And that's a good thing, to be impatient, but just being mindful of all those steps that need to be taken to get to point B.
100%. And I think even though, you've left that business in November, I think it takes a lot of courage to leave something that you're massively part of, because I think some people feel stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
And they have those feelings that you're having, that this isn't quite right.
Yeah.
But they just live with it for years, almost like the guys that you were talking about at the beginning that are in the job, the freight forward to 50, 60. They probably had similar feelings than you did, where you're like, this is just a day-to-day thing.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of courage to leave something and go, do you know what? I'm going to leave the business, the job, the thing that's making me unhappy. So I think, massive well done for just reading yourself and having that self-awareness again and going, actually, no, I'm out.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that, mate. It doesn't feel like it at the time.
No.
It does feel like a cop-out. It feels like I've just let this, it's gotten tough and I've let it go. But then on reflection, you start to look back and then you unpack that. And it was I could see the progression. It wasn't just a sort of a snap decision of saying this is getting too hard, because we'd been through a lot up to that point. Of product development and failures, and it was just an ongoing thing. So it wasn't like, oh, this is tough, I'm sort of going to give up now. It was a hard decision.
Yeah.
It was. So I appreciate you saying that. And since November, it's been a real journey of kind of self-discovery, and it's been pretty dark in places, to be fair. I mean, you sort of go back to that, what am I going to do? The age that I'm at now, this kind of was it felt like at the time, my last hurrah. And I'm thinking, well, I'm 50 now. Things have got to start changing from here on in. And you can get very much kind of drawn down and held back by those kind of feelings. But it is now sort of that opening up to opportunity. I mean, it's a little bit like having this conversation today. It's come out of something. It was a meeting that I had, that we were introduced.
Yeah, at the old Bond store.
The old Bond store, you never know where a coffee is going to lead.
100%.
where nothing is going to lead you anywhere is if you're at home wallowing in that self-pity. But saying that, when you're in that mindset, it doesn't matter who's saying to you, come on, James, pull yourself together. It doesn't make any difference until you go through that process of coming out the other side, that you can then go, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So, I kind of look at situations where people are well-meaning and they'll say to you, look, there is hope, there is whatever, and you kind of need that, but you need that at the time that you need it.
Yeah.
And it's having that, again, self-awareness to know when people will hear that and will, be able to receive it.
Yeah.
But when you're in that moment,
it
doesn't matter what anybody says to you, you're just going through that darkness.
And everyone needs that kind of to have that wallowing and that kind of that amount of time. It's just getting to the point where that ends and then you start taking action again. So what do you think it is that's brought you through those dark times, that's really helped you through it all?
I think, certainly family. I mean, my wife's been amazing, so supportive. And the kids are older now. So my eldest is 26, middle one's 23, and the youngest is 22. And, I've got a responsibility to them to show them that there is hope.
Yeah.
So it's, not only just for yourself that you've got to think for my own self-respect and esteem and how I feel about myself, is that I've got to, show them that I am, somebody that can guide them and be an example to them. So, but also to there's this thing, for the respect from my wife as well, of not just being at home all day going, I feel blocked. I don't know what to do from here. And it's accepting that as well, of knowing that you've got to move on from this. You cannot stay where you are. That's not an option. But again, that's a process of getting to that point. So, I think all of those that's, accountability.
It's accountability is key, from yourself, from family, and then the drive to keep going. And one thing I found frustrating after I lost it all is I kept remember thinking, I've been in business since I was 24. I was about 34 at the time, and even then I had this pressure of age, and I'm like, I'm old now, and I was at 34, and this could take me years to get successful again and everything. And then someone shared a meme, and it had Colonel Sanders on it, and he was like in his 60s when he started KFC, and Henry Ford was in his 40s, and then you look at it and go, actually, age doesn't matter. It really doesn't. We are where we are. Having the accountability, the self-awareness that you've had to look within before you're just blaming everyone else, that's just compounding that learning again and again and again. So what's next then for you?
Well, as I said, there's potentially a partnership, or, a kind of a three-way business proposition that's coming up.
Yeah.
So I'm just remaining curious.
Yeah.
I think that being open to the opportunity, just having conversations, not putting too much pressure on it, just seeing where it goes.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. But, I've got a couple of relationships now with two German companies that do suits as well that you can wear. One of them is a lot more technical, so much more in terms of sports specific rehabilitation. So for sports clubs, big box gyms and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That you can be very much around the muscle activation. So this one particular suit will detect how well a muscle's contracting, or if it's inhibited, or, if you've got an injury, you'll kind of figure it out where it is. And then you can stimulate it with the suit very specifically. So that's one particular element.
Yeah.
So that we're looking at potentially, moving into football clubs and, other sort of areas that we've got links with. And the other company is much more sort of mass market home type sort of thing. So similar to Hyperbody. Actually, it's the same suit that we were using, but this company has now created videos that you can have at home, and it will stimulate the suit in synchronized versions with the suit with videos.
Yeah.
So you can, watch the video at home and do a complete workout. And it's really easy to put on, really simple to use, a great app that you can use as well. So those are the two kind of elements that we're kind of looking at. So becoming more kind of aligned to working with companies and developing the business around those, rather than doing, our own suit. So working with other companies.
Amazing. Love that. Well, very much looking forward to seeing the next steps of your journey. So as we're coming towards the end of this episode, what's the best way for people to be able to follow your journey and see what you're doing in the future?
Yeah, well, I'm rubbish with social media at the moment.
Yeah.
But I know that's an area that I'm going to get better at.
Yeah.
Not that I must get better at or I have to get better at, but I will get better at.
Yeah.
So really at the moment, just very, very simply, James Seilo, SEILO, @me.com.
Brilliant.
So James Seilo @me.com. Send me an email.
Yeah.
And I can,
cool.
copy you in. If there's any advice you want around, health, wellness, fitness, I'm massively into the longevity space, health span, which is becoming more and more prevalent now, in the media. And I reckon in the next sort of 10, 15 years, we're going to reach this point called longevity, sort of in terms of the health span, that we'll be able to escape velocity, that sort of health span, escape velocity. That technology will be such that for every year that you live, you'll get more than years back in, way that things are moving in terms of the medical field.
Yeah.
So, like 3D printed organs and all that sort of stuff, stem cell therapy, the way it's developing. So massively into that.
Yeah.
Massively into my EMS.
Yeah.
And just generally, health and well-being.
Yeah, and I think it's so poignant for this podcast as well, because we have a lot of business owners, and I always talk about how our mental, emotional well-being and our physical health is linked to the success of our businesses. And I find that the more I work on my personal fitness, the better decisions I make, the better person I turn up, even as a father, as a friend, as a husband, it's all linked. So actually, like, having people who are now working on that, and also you're giving people other ways that not just the traditional gym, because it doesn't work for a lot of people. You're right. Like I'm not a really macho man, and standing in mirrors and everyone looking at each other and people sort of doing the whole shouting and dropping weights and things. This doesn't work for me, and
it's massively intimidating.
It's intimidating, and I don't really enjoy that part. And some people do, which is it's each to their own. But giving 100%. People other angles is so key to how we can develop and have that turn up in that best physical state.
But the fascinating thing for me, I mean, I'm also, working with high net worth individuals, and providing a very bespoke service to them, really kind of drilling into the detail of what works for them. And the fascinating thing for me is there's a lot of guys seemingly have got their business sorted, but have neglected their health.
Yeah.
So it's all about that kind of, grind and, and whatever drives them. And again, that sort of probably comes from childhood, and we go into the psychology of that. But it's like, that self-sacrifice of living hard and working hard and, really, but not applying it to themselves, not having enough self-love, or going, I need to be, as you said, at peak performance to be able to deal with this that I'm going through. So that's the thing that really kind of fascinates me, is that disconnect between health and wealth.
Yeah.
You get a lot of guys that are successful in business, but overweight, have injuries and health issues.
Heart problems,
That they don't, because they deal with it on a daily basis, they don't stop. And again, sort of like talking about the pandemic, we had that full stop to go, we have to not go into work now. And have that awareness about, actually, I wake up in the morning and my back aches, my knees creak. I feel tired all the time, But when you're grinding, when you're going, you just think that's the norm.
Yeah.
And you don't think of any,
Fill yourself with coffee every day. And
it's that sticking plaster thing.
Yeah, it is.
But because it's become your norm, you don't then think, I could improve this.
Yeah.
And it's having that level of agency that our bodies can heal themselves.
Yeah.
But it's having the knowledge and the advice and the guidance to realise that. I mean, so much is out in the media, but it's really having that kind of person to say, you know what, you can fix yourself.
Yeah.
The body's an incredible thing.
Yeah.
It's just, if you start to scratch beneath the surface, it's an amazing piece of equipment.
Yeah.
I mean, phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to definitely follow the journey. So we're just coming towards the end of this episode. Have you got any final words for our audience? Anything around failure? What would you like to say?
I think with regards failure, and again, not to sort of use terms that have been used before in terms of it being your greatest kind of learning, because again, at the time of failure, all of that just doesn't come into the equation. You're just thinking about the pain that you're in, the pain cave that you're in at that moment in time, and you can't see anything else. You can't see the opportunities because you're so myopic. You're so in the moment of this thing that's happening to you.
Processing it all.
And, you'll absolutely be able to attest to it. But I think know that there is a process that you go through always. I know it's been said before, but this too shall pass. As bad as it seems in that moment in time, you will come out of it, but it's having the people around you to support you, and just to listen. I think giving advice, what I would say to people is, don't be quick to give advice based on your own experience, because it isn't that other person's experience.
Yeah.
Just listen.
Yeah.
Ask the right questions. So very much like a kind of coaching role.
Yeah.
Ask the right questions and only offer advice if you're sure that that's what's required at that moment in time.
Yeah.
So just be there, be present, just listen.
Yeah.
But don't be too quick to jump in with your own experience. Oh, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
You'll get over it. Don't worry about it. You know, that's life.
Yeah.
It's shit sometimes, but so just, that would be my advice.
I absolutely love that, because quite often as humans, we're problem solvers, and someone tells us a problem and we instantly go into
problem solving mode. Yeah.
And someone once said to me, we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them proportionally in that way.
Yeah.
And I'm a massive talker, and I've had to work hard on the listening bit.
Yeah.
And also because I want to solve problems for people.
Yeah.
And you're right, like listening. Sometimes people, and I've talked about mental health on this podcast a lot, like sometimes people that are suffering from mental health or are suicidal or going through a bad time, they don't need someone to solve their problems because they're not ready to listen to them. They just need to be listened to.
We're hardwired to do that. We're hardwired to do that.
Yeah.
And it is that sort of, jumping in with, because we think, well, why are they telling me this? Unless they want my advice, unless they want me to solve it for them. And we are, fundamentally problem solvers.
We are.
As you said. And it's that sort of desire to go, well, they're telling me this because they want my help.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump in and give them some advice.
Yeah. Just got to listen.
But just listen.
Just listen. You're so right. Yeah. I love that. And what a perfect way to end this podcast. Thank you so much, James, for coming on. We only met last week, and it's just been great just to jump straight in and have this interview and get to know you more today. Thank you for being so candid and open, and really looking forward to now seeing the next part of your journey, the focused and, doing your due diligence and seeing where these relationships go and what happens. And I'm going to certainly be following along. So thanks for coming on, James.
You're hugely welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been fabulous.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, what a fantastic episode that's been today with James. If you've liked what you've listened to, please like this podcast, share it and subscribe. And I shall see you next week. Thanks all.